Hello and welcome to Simcast, the higher education simulation podcast. My name's Lawrence Hill and I'm the chair of the simulation group in the School of Health Sciences at UEA Norwich.
Hello everyone, my name is Tony Jeremy and I'm the academic lead for simulation-based education here at UEA Norwich.
A very warm welcome and welcome back. And if you're enjoying Simcast, if you're enjoying the series, please do like and subscribe so that we can keep in touch with you with all of the latest podcasts. Today, we are extremely lucky to be joined by Karen Botsford. Hello, Karen, and
Hi,
welcome.
Karen. Hello, nice to see you both.
It's lovely to see you too. Thank you so much for coming on. Karen.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, oh gosh, where do I start?
Tell us a little bit about your clinical background and then how you got into higher education.
Yeah, so I'm a registered adult nurse by background, but work in the paramedic science team. So
Okay.
I'm a bit of a strange anomaly. And I kind of got interested in education quite early on in my career when I started becoming a practice educator. And an opportunity arose with Health Education England. And I took it, and it kind of segued me into meeting Lawrence and doing work with him around paramedic placements. And then the vacancy here came up. I'd worked alongside other educators, other lecturers from the university, and I thought, do you know what, I really fancy giving it a go. And luckily I got the job. So here I am.
Absolutely no luck involved in that at all. So Karen was awesome.
Adult nurse by background.
Yes.
What was your clinical experience before you came into higher education?
So I worked predominantly in the emergency department.
Okay.
I have worked on assessment units as well, but predominantly ED.
Yeah, not too far removed from paramedic science. You obviously work with paramedics
Yeah.
when they brought the patients through the door. So there's a
Yeah.
there's a natural
There was a
progression
bit, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. So what is your role at UEA now? What do you do now, Karen?
Okay, so I've kind of already said that I'm a lecturer in paramedic science, which is a great team, by the way. I love being with the paramedic team. Not that the other teams aren't great. And I run a module in year 2 that does actually have quite a lot of simulation content.
Okay, great.
I am a plagiarism officer for the school, so one of the I was going to say, even more boo, I sit on the Student Senate Disciplinary Committee.
I'm going to have to take the opportunity to link to our episode on the use of AI and simulation because there's some parallels there with plagiarism, isn't there? So there'll be a link to that in the top right corner. Sorry about shameless plug.
Don't run the script from that episode through Turnitin.
No, I won't blood it. Do you know, I would say there are some positives of AI.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's
I've
what we
used it
talked
for
about.
scenarios. Yeah, I've used it to write scenarios. It is really helpful, but just don't get it to write your essay. That's my top tip.
So you're a busy academic. You run a module. You've got this clinical background. What else do you do that involves simulation? Because I know you're quite active in terms of health
you're really
education.
not telling us as much as you actually do.
So I also am an advanced life support instructor for the Resus Council. I'm an advanced paediatric life support instructor for the Advanced Life Support Group. I'm a generic instructor course instructor as well. So I go around teaching other healthcare professionals and how to facilitate as well. So yeah, I guess I am quite busy. I'm also a volunteer responder for Norfolk Accident Rescue Service, so I get a bit of pre-hospital experience that way as well. So, yeah, I guess I probably do a lot more than I'm actually admitting to.
So spare time isn't something that you have much of.
No, but when I do, I am learning Italian, and I also love an exercise class called Clubbercise, which the students think is hilarious. They think it's hilarious because it's
I'm imagining glow sticks. Oh, yes, actual glow sticks.
Glow sticks in the dark, banging tunes.
That sounds amazing.
It is.
I mean, this leads on really nicely from our last episode when we were talking about, simulation as a side hustle. It's increasingly important in healthcare education, and you obviously have to squeeze that into what you do in your role as an academic.
Yeah, and it's a really important part of healthcare education. It's been around for many years. It's an opportunity for students and learners to practice skills in a safer environment than being out practicing on their patients, so they have the opportunity to develop.
I love that use of the word safer there as well, that actually it's never truly safe, is it? But,
no.
But anyway, so one of the reasons we've got you on, apart from this, this breadth of experience that you've got in simulation, the reason we wanted to get you on today was to talk about a really interesting simulation-based education research project that you're leading on, right?
with your good selves.
Yeah, well,
quick conflict of interest. We are both involved in this project as well. So,
but tell us a bit about it.
So you came up with the name, Lawrence, but it's the GOLD in simulation. So the Guiding Observation Learner Debrief in Simulation. And the idea being that those who are not actively participating in a simulation are having an opportunity to observe and get learning through that observation, because sometimes we notice our learners aren't always participating quite as actively. If they're not actually hands-on, often I've seen learners sort of looking at their phone, and they might be looking at guidelines, but then when you ask them to participate in the debrief, they don't necessarily contribute quite as effectively as they'd like.
And this is something at UEA we've kind of stumbled onto a little bit more and more, because since the transformation of the Edith Cavell building into the simulation centre, we can put a link to the tour for that one in one of the episodes. We now have debrief spaces, so people are removed from the simulation event and now in a situation where we've got a lot more observer learners who now probably need something to do. To stop them from being distracted and things like that.
And it's one of the, it was a very sort of powerful comment actually that really made me think about this. I was teaching on an advanced paediatric life support course, and one of the candidates was always being chosen to be the helper in the simulation. So she wasn't leading a simulation, she was helping. And she said, I'm struggling because I'm missing out on learning through observation. And it was a really powerful message to me, because I thought, well, how can we help students and learners actually gain more if they're observing? Because it seems a bit of a disconnect. She really wanted the opportunity to be learning through observation, yet feedback we get from our students is often more sim. We want more sim. But what they're saying is they want to practice and participate actively, but that's not the only way to learn.
No, quite right.
So I did a sort of bit of a literature trawl as part of it, and there is some emerging literature coming that shows that tools really help those active observations to occur, and then it helps guide your debrief. So I thought, well, that's great. What can we do? Because we know sim is an important part of our healthcare course, but it's so resource intense and time consuming. There's simply not enough hours in the timetable. So how can we make the most of the time we've got, so they're not all saying, I want to be leading, I want to be a crewmate, I want to be... So,
And I think another one of the key things for me in it as well, wasn't it, was that it was about bringing the learning outcomes to the forefront of the all learners' minds while they're engaging in that simulation. And because I think one of the things that we've seen anecdotally, and I think probably most people listening would also acknowledge, is that often when you try and involve other learners in a debrief, they often will offer evaluative statements rather than statements about how, in what way the learning outcomes have been achieved.
Because they're not, experienced in debriefing. And for many of our learners, they're pre-registration and, they're focusing on learning many of the other aspects when we're doing skills and simulation, rather than the nuances and arts of delivering effective debriefing.
So the purpose of the tool, then, in summary, is to promote engagement of learners who are observing a simulation take place, encourage them to make constructive learning-orientated contributions to the debrief rather than evaluative statements, and to focus on the learning outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by sort of default, then, they also feel more able to offer constructive feedback as opposed to, you were really good.
Exactly.
I think it's hard to sit as a learner. It can be really hard when you watch someone else to feel comfortable saying, actually, I noticed that you were late putting the defibrillator pads on, or you were quite late putting the oxygen on that poorly patient, and actually having something tangible on a check sheet, maybe who seems to feel a bit more comfortable to be able to offer that, because it's not just coming from them, if that makes sense. It's coming from the learning outcomes.
And it's coming from the peers.
Yeah, and it's coming from the peers.
And that actually is, we'll kind of talk in a bit later, is starting to come through in some of the preliminary data. So we talked a bit there about why you thought it was necessary to develop the tool. What's the background? You said you did a bit of a literature trawl. Can you tell us a bit more about what there is already?
There's not lots. There is sort of more recent literature reviews coming about where they've kind of looked at small scale studies. The Resuscitation Council do already use a tool as part of their advanced life support teaching, as you both know. And
that's called the team tool.
The team tool, which does help, I think, guide people with what they can do to support the feedback peer to peer. But I think we needed more specific detail on our form because, as you said, a lot of our learners are pre-registration, probably quite new to simulation, and it can be quite hard to really know what they're looking out for, if that makes sense.
And also that team tool is also generic, isn't
it?
And it doesn't, you can't really easily adapt it to specific session learning outcomes.
No, and so it was important to be able to make the learning outcomes the priority. So it's at the very top of the sheet, and that means it can be adapted. The way in which I use the tool might be different to how someone in a different program wants to use the tool, so they can adapt it however they want, but it's got some key framework there to help guide. And that was important, that it wasn't so generic that it's not transferable. Yeah,
great. That's really interesting. Could you tell us and everyone listening a little bit more about the tool itself? So what does the tool contain? What does it look like apart from the learning outcome?
What was your thought process as you were designing it?
Yeah.
So it's sort of, like we say, we've got the learning outcomes on there. It also has a section where we ask the learner to look at specific technical skills.
Okay.
So that can be adapted according to the session. But also the next stage is about non-technical skills. So really thinking about how that person or the people involved in that simulation are communicating with each other. Are they delegating? Are they communicating well? Are they using closed loop? Are they acknowledging one another effectively in terms of, they're asked to do something and they acknowledge it? Are there micro conversations going on and the team leaders not actually being included? So they can make notes on that. And then we look for unintended learning outcomes because, let's face it, we can have suggested learning outcomes and you can guarantee someone will say something completely different is their key learning, which is great.
So you're asking the learners to look for their own unintended learning outcomes in a scenario?
Well, they can.
Yeah.
I think we're not pushing them to, but quite often they come out.
There's the space, and there's the space for them to record those on the form.
And there's that space for them to also reflect afterwards on how what they've observed could then influence their own practice.
So again, the tool has the potential to encourage that reflective conversation rather than merely providing feedback.
Yeah, and learning from one another, which is important as well.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a one-pager.
Yeah.
So it's hopefully then it's accessible, and hopefully we'd be able to put up an image of that so that people can see that.
And in terms of using it, are you? Let's say that you've got a group of 5 to 10 observers.
Yeah.
Would you expect everyone to use the tool, or maybe just one or two people? How would it be used in?
I think where there's larger groups, you could probably pair people up.
Okay.
One of the ways we've used it mostly at the minute is in smaller group simulations. So it's only one person sitting back and doing the observation while the others are participating. However, when we run our major incident simulation that I run in the paramedic program, not as big as Jason's, can't make any promises about it being anywhere near as big as that, but it gives an opportunity for people to group together, observe the simulation through our technology, and then work together to make notes on things. Because actually another thing is if they're in groups, one person will see one thing and one person might see something else. So it can be used in a different way according to what you're doing, really.
And I guess that's also encouraging those two to be engaging in active dialogue between them. Yeah. And this is one of the things that I noticed when we started using simulation with remote learners watching remotely, is that we were watching the simulation take place and there was this kind of low level kind of chatter, and I was a bit like, guys, can we pay attention to the simulation?
And they weren't.
and that's exactly what they were doing. And then inadvertently I've then stunted that dialogue. So giving them something to work on together hopefully helps keep them focused on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then hopefully they feel more engaged themselves in the simulation, as opposed to sitting back and not really feeling like they've got an opportunity, not just to be active in the simulation, but participate in the feedback as well. I think sometimes that can be difficult in the feedback and debrief, is if you've not been actively doing, you don't always feel that you're quite able to contribute in the same way.
Interesting, and we'll see when we come to the data whether that makes sense.
Well, exactly, and that's exactly why we wanted to run an evaluation alongside.
So with the data, how are you evaluating it? What's the sort of methodology you're using?
So we're using a mixed methodology, so we're collecting quant and qualitative data.
Okay.
And we've already started to gather quite a bit of data, and it's been phenomenal, actually. The actual information we're getting was far outweighed what I was expecting. I was expecting a bit of pushback and no, I don't really want to use it. But actually it was all very positive. I think 100% of those so far have said they've enjoyed using it.
We've got something in the notes. So Lawrence, if you just want to read those, and then we'll be interesting to hear your sort of insights on that, Karen.
So it's a mixed method survey, and the kind of some of the kind of more quantitative outcomes. So far we know it's limited. There's been 12 responders so far to the survey. 10 of those have been paramedics and 2 have been ODPs, which is not surprising considering the investigators are paramedics and ODP lecturers. But 100% of learners so far agree that the tool, A, facilitates meaningful contribution to the debrief, B, the promotion of constructive learning conversation, and C, increases focus on the intended learning outcomes. That's 100% of learners agree or strongly agree with those statements. That's incredible.
It is. I was absolutely blown away by the data that we've started to gather. And I know it's a small number at the moment, but this is a project that's rolling across the whole academic year. And just to gain some insights like that was absolutely fantastic.
One other really positive things was that 100% of learners either agreed or strongly agreed that observing others in simulation, as opposed to actively participating, is important for their learning.
And that kind of goes against what we had originally sort of thought, anticipated, or what even the learners thought themselves in terms of, I have to do something to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so surprised, and we utilised the tool again yesterday, so I'm hoping that some more data will start to gather. We'd also love to get more data from other programs, because I think it'd be really nice to see how it's can be utilised across other programs as well.
We should come back to that towards the end of this conversation, I think.
Just to give me an idea, so we've had 12 respondents, but how many people approximately would you say have used the tool?
So the first time it was used around that was 40 students. So I'd say that, that's about 25% of the learners have completed the study, which is not bad going, actually, considering it's like, it can be hard
always
to get
a stumbling block, isn't it? Is getting feedback from people.
One's never going to get 100% response rate to a survey, 25% to a survey, and considering it was like self-selecting, that a QR code is offered for learners to choose to participate if they want to. They're not even being sent it. So these are people that are kind of self-selecting. So we need to be mindful of that as well in terms of how we interpret the results. And kind of to add a little bit of balance, 25% of the sample so far have said that they found engaging with the Gold tool during the sim was not possible while actively watching the simulation take place.
Yeah, and in fact, when we were using it yesterday, a student said, I find it detracts me, so I find it better to watch the simulation but then use the tool. Hopefully they've recorded this, because I did say fill in the survey, because they've said then they can use it for their own reflections. So it can still be used in a way that's positive. I hope that they do want to participate.
The potential for a bit of cognitive overload. And as a debriefer who's facilitating sim, I completely understand and appreciate that. Yeah, the amount of times I've thought, I need to put that in a debrief, I need to write that down.
Yeah.
And then you're busy doing something else and you struggle. So understandable.
And I think it was a completely valid comment. It's not going to be ideal for everybody, but I thought it was there was still a positive aspect to it. It detracted me from watching the sim, but I had it there to go back and reflect on what happened.
So that was some of the quantitative feedback. So some of the qualitative responses we've got here. I think the debrief part is extremely important for observers to have prepared feedback and encourages observers to actively watch the scenario to prepare constructive comments. Made easier with the gold sheet to keep learning objectives in mind.
I mean, that's exactly what we wanted the tool to do, wasn't it? It was for them to feel enabled to contribute actively to the debrief of the facilitation and feel like they're getting learning from it themselves. And having that structure, I think, is incredibly important because, as I said before, it can feel quite uncomfortable making constructive comments on your peers' performance without it coming across as a negative. Sometimes people feel it's quite hard to say, actually, I think you could have done this differently, or I noticed you weren't using names, so that's fantastic. That's how that people are seeing it.
Yeah, another positive comment here was, I really enjoyed using this tool. It helped me to better understand what I should be achieving in my own simulations and also to give detailed reflections during debriefs.
It's quite deep reflective thinking, and
it is
from that, isn't it?
Yeah, that shows a real level of metacognition, doesn't it?
It does. And again, similar comments yesterday it's been really helpful having this, because I can then see how I can improve my own simulations.
Someone else has put using the gold tool to help create talking points in the debrief.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we're debriefing and we ask that question of, so you were participating, what did you think? And they don't really know where to go with it. It's something to hang a hat on, so to speak, isn't it? That they feel like there's something that they can focus on to help guide, I think, as well.
And it's just as that's, I mean, I've read these comments before we started recording this podcast, but it's just occurred to me that perhaps a way that we can adapt our practice using with this tool is to actually use the students' own words and say, has anyone got any talking points?
Yeah, absolutely.
That they'd like to contribute to this debrief instead of, that might be a way of kind of tapping into some of that.
I think that's a really good point. And I think the whole point of starting this in the first place was to try and aid students to actively feel like they can learn and participate through observation, and adding their own words in is.
Karen, can I ask a question? Have you used the tool with different year groups, and if you have you seen any difference in experience?
So it's only so far. I personally have only used it with the year twos because that's where my module focus is. However, I am aware that it has started to be used with our year 3 cohort. Okay. And hopefully we'll start using it with our year 1 cohort soon. I think sometimes with the year 1s, it can feel quite difficult, I guess, how you introduce them to debriefing. But in fairness, we've kind of, prior to the formalised tool, we were asking them to start making notes on what they were observing. So hopefully it won't feel too...
Yeah, I think
unusual.
I'm just trying to think. I think with my ODPs, it was year 3s. If you've got people who are saying that they're cognitively overloaded using the tool, to then do that to year 1 learners who are again learning multiple processes simultaneously might be a bit of a stretch.
I think though one of the ways we can look at adapting that is how we might be able to focus maybe on just technical skills, for example, or just non-technical skills. So we're not asking them to focus on quite as much as we are at the moment. So it's something we can definitely consider adapting. So
that's a great suggestion, that you could sort of divide the room and then give them different task roles within that. Yeah, that sounds brilliant.
One last comment here, a good tool for facilitating peer-to-peer feedback, which I think is so important.
Just fantastic, that comment, because that's exactly what we wanted to try and encourage them to do, was feel that they can do that and enable them to give constructive peer-to-peer feedback. Because we know that we can sit here and say to them, you know, you didn't do this, or have you thought about it this way? But when it comes from their peers, it feels much more powerful, I think.
And also when you're facilitating a debrief and the group is talking amongst itself.
Yeah.
I'm always feeling great.
Yeah, I don't need to do anything.
I'm waiting. Do I need to redirect this? Is it becoming evaluative? But the fact that there is people feeling more empowered to have those peer-to-peer conversations is just that's gold.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, you know, this is going to be a project that spans the whole of the academic year, so there's still some work to do.
Yes.
But early on, do you think that the tool is achieving its objectives that you set out to do?
Yes. As it stands at the moment, it's working really well with the group. Mainly I've been using it with our year twos, but we do need to see how it could be adapted and be evaluated, being used with other groups, other programs, other year groups, whether how post-registration programs can use it. So it's got potential to be explored in much more depth. I think we've still got some way to go. And that's why, again, love different programs to get involved.
Okay. So I think probably we should probably talk about some of the limitations that are emerging as well from the qualitative data for balance. And one of them that I've got here is overall a useful tool, but it's hard to be involved and write at the same time. You mostly end up writing and getting lost in the simulation as a result. And it distracted me too much from the sim, so I ended up missing stuff. Yeah,
and I think that's a totally valid comment to make, isn't it? Everyone learns in different ways, and everyone has different sort of abilities to make brief notes and keep on top of observation, and others feel that they have to focus purely on writing or purely on the simulation. And as one learner has said, you know, they would rather use it as a reflective tool for after the simulation, so they can focus on the simulation, but then they've got something to go back to and say, well, did that happen? Yes or no? All right, what have I learned from that? Now I'm reflecting on it.
Or so, is there something I could have learned?
Yeah.
Have you had any learner groups that have used it more than once?
Yes.
And when they've had a little bit more familiarity, are we finding any data out of that?
Well, let's hope they do complete it. I'll push them again, because it was yesterday that the group that had used it previously is using it again. But that's why we're wanting to collect it again over the academic year. I did think that they all did seem more familiar with it because they knew what was coming. However, obviously, that's anecdotal. Can't say with any robustness. So, like I say, I have asked the students to consider not just doing the survey once, and evaluating it over time. So we'll see. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're fairly early stages, aren't we? We've still got 6 months or so left of the study duration. So, were there any unexpected outcomes for you so far? So we probably anticipated that they were going to say might be a bit distracting, and we were hoping that they would say help me keep me focused on the learning outcomes. But has anything popped out for you so far that you're like, ooh, unintended learning outcome?
I was surprised at how much they were willing to engage with it.
Okay.
Really surprised from I guess in my own mind, maybe I also thought students really just wanted to be participants and hadn't actually considered that they were really comfortable with being active observers in simulation. So I guess the learning outcome, an unintended outcome from there, is to expect the unexpected, really.
Yeah, but also that recognition that being that observing learner is...
They see it as valuable.
Yeah. I picked out a couple of the qualitative comments that I thought were quite interesting. So there's 3 here, and I'll give them to you back to back. I think the use of a score sheet is a good way for learners to engage scored participants of the criteria provided and looking for criteria to score.
Yeah, that again just goes back to that thought that learners do often see simulation as a form of assessment.
Yeah. No matter what we do, you cert the basic assumption, you make sure that it's clear it's a learning experience, but still there's this innate focus on evaluation.
Yeah. Funnily enough, a comment made at the end by a student at the end of the simulations yesterday was, you were all so supportive. And I thought, well, was that because you were expecting us to be scoring you?
Yeah, sure.
And rather than seeing it as a learning event, this is about, educational development. It's about learning, but they still have that sort of thought it's an assessment process.
There's always that element of evaluation apprehension. And seemingly no matter what we do.
Yeah. You can tell them right from the very beginning it's an opportunity.
Introduce a new tool. Oh, no, I've got to do this as well.
Yeah.
I just don't feel that offering a score sheet actually provides the
But I don't think it is a score sheet.
It's not.
I don't think it is a score sheet.
I don't either.
I think it goes back to that kind of primeval expectation that we are evaluating performance because someone is their clinical expertise, their interpersonal expertise are on the line.
They want to prove they're capable.
And it relates to their identity, doesn't it? Because everyone wants to be competent and proficient.
Absolutely.
And the simulation is an opportunity for your proficiency to be revealed in the same way that it's an opportunity for any deficits in your practice to be evident to everyone watching. And that's a hard bridge to cross.
And I guess that maybe one of the unintended learning outcomes is realising students don't like feeling vulnerable, do they? Hence saying safer rather than a safe environment because they still feel vulnerable if people pick up that things haven't gone quite so well. So, but I think what I've noticed is actually having it come straight from the tool means it's kind of not exactly the observer's words.
It's one step removed from personal opinion.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
interesting.
That was an interesting. I think it makes it they seem to feel more comfortable. There's still a lot of positive comments come out, which is fair enough. And no one's going to want to sit there. You don't want your peers to sit there and say, this was bad, this was bad, this was bad, this was bad.
But at least that's better than it was good. At least if there's some kind of, positive affirmation around a specific aspect.
Yeah.
Actually, I thought the way that you maintained situational awareness was good. That's kind of useful, even if it's still an evaluation.
Yeah.
But also that's where the skill sets in the debriefer
100%.
who is working alongside the gold tool to then perhaps look at any critical events that need to be unpacked.
But also then to take that statement of, I think your situational awareness was good. Okay, how so?
Yeah.
What was it about that, do you think, that enabled this person to maintain situational awareness?
Yeah.
And we're back off again.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing as a debrief facilitator, that's our role, isn't it? It's to enable discussion. And I think, like you say, saying, okay, you said this, how so? I did notice that actually some of them were naturally saying, I noticed you stepped back to lead really early and therefore you were able to see what was going on. And yesterday I said, I noticed that, but you still were keen to get involved. Why was that? And as debrief facilitator, that was great to have them start the conversation and then I come in. And then other students, were then able to say, well, yeah, I know. It's because I'm such a doer and I want to keep doing. And they then learn from that, don't they? And I think that was really, really useful to feel like I don't just then also sit there being me, telling them I noticed this. I noticed that.
And that sort of kind of makes me think of one of the previous episodes we've recorded about the 4 horsemen of the debrief apocalypse. Yeah. The last thing you want is to be that tutor in that tutor mode, even that lead facilitator. If you can encourage the group, even better.
I guess an unintended outcome is it helps novice debriefers to take a step back.
Yeah.
We've said before, haven't we? If you're hearing your voice too much, you're not debriefing properly, and using a tool to help learners engage with that even more is
so I always remember
useful.
I had the privilege of working alongside Mike Davis, who was very much instrumental in developing the generic instructors course. And one of the things that he says is, wait, why am I talking? And he always, if he's been an educator on a course, he has said to us, the framework to use is candidate group self. So you are the last person who talks. And I think that's the tool then allows that group to feel more enabled to have that discussion.
Awesome. Cool. The final kind of unexpected outcome for me when I was just looking at the data was this statement, and it says, the goal tool, provides those taking part with a written record of what the observers thought of their simulation. And it's obvious, really, when you think about it, but I hadn't imagined that learners would take the goal tool away and use that as something to then reflect on and learn from later. Yeah. Like Tony was saying earlier, as a simulation debriefer, your cognitive bandwidth is pretty much at max when you're facilitating.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And it's probably the same because we're asking metacognition of learners in debrief. So it's not surprising that people might feel a little bit jammed, with info.
Absolutely.
And like with this, using the goal tool, you can take that away, and then you've got the power to know after that.
Yeah, and that surprised me, but like you say, it makes perfect sense actually, because we don't always remember everything that we've been told, and also we often, if someone says something a bit negative, we focus on that more than perhaps those positives. So maybe having that positive comment record is really helpful for confidence building as well, because, sim can feel quite alien to some people, and some people struggle to get into the sort of mindset of it, and maybe having a record of what actually they've done well as what could go better could be a really good tool to get them more engaged in it. It's becoming such a big part of healthcare education, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just got bigger and bigger, and not just during their educational journey through university, but once they go into the big wide world of healthcare, it continues to be a part of their continuing professional development. And so it's not going to go away. So if that allows them a way of getting more comfortable by realising what they can do really well, hopefully it's positive.
Yeah, exactly. And what a lovely segue into, so what's next for Golden Simulation Tool? What's next?
As I've said more than once, we would love to get more courses involved, different programs, different institutions, different organisations. Would be great to evaluate it over a bigger data set, over a bigger sort of participant group, because at the moment one of the limitations is it is only really being utilised with pre-registration learners.
Yeah, a single site at the moment.
Single site,
the ethics at the moment is for a single site, but I think that, I would concur that it would be, depending on the outcomes of this study, it would be really interesting to involve other programs and other institutions.
Absolutely.
So if you are listening to this and you are intrigued by the use of this tool and you'd like to collaborate with us, please do drop us a comment, and we'll keep your records, and we'll keep a note of that, and we'll get back in touch when we're ready for phase 2. It'd be lovely to work with some other like-minded educators and see what we can do in a collaboration.
Absolutely. So please think about hearing more about it.
And so we're collecting data until the end of this academic year?
Yep. So it'll probably be around the end of June, July sort of time, won't it, when the academic year kind of finishes up here.
Where do you think you'd like to start to present the work or publish?
So I'd love to present at Ashby. Can never say that properly. Ashby. Yeah. I think it'd be great because that's a big simulation conference that attracts people from across all sorts of different backgrounds within healthcare. A simulation education journal would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So watch this space then.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
So I think we should probably start to wrap things up. So just before we go, what would be your kind of closing reflections as a simulation educator with the work that you've been doing?
Never underestimate what your learners are actually doing during the simulation, because actually this has just highlighted they are probably more engaged than you think they are. However, we know that from the literature that's emerging that they do value a tool. So hopefully this will help that.
Great.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak to us, Karen.
Lovely. Thank you for inviting me along.
You're more than welcome.
And thank you for listening, for joining us for this episode of Simcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do drop us a like and a comment. It'd be lovely to hear from you. And we will see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.